Today is the day of Black Remembrance, where Zumbi, the great Quilombola leader, was killed, and so he's venerated on this particular day. A Quilombo is, of course, a slave refuge state. In Palmares is where Zumbi is from, but they are all over Brazil in a response to slavery and the desire for freedom. This week was also important from the point of view that yesterday 5 military people were arrested on a plot to assassinate Lula da Silva, the president, after he won the election and lost to Jair, and Jair Bolsonaro lost his position. Also, the G20 is going on right now in Brazil, which is being shepherded and run by the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva. So Brazil's kind of in the news a lot this week, and in particular, there's an important case which has relevance for the United States, which is the Supreme Court of Brazil is ruling and discussing on the role of social media, and particularly Twitter/X, on the questions of social media. So we are really fortunate to have from Brazil David Niemer, and I'm going to pass the more detailed introduction about David to my colleague, Brian Pitts. Brian, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I think that everyone is aware it's how timely this discussion is, especially considering the results of the U.S. presidential election and that Elon Musk is going to have an ever-increasing role in U.S. politics as well. But Brazilians already had experience with Elon Musk getting involved in their politics due to the increasingly acrimonious rivalry between Musk and the Supremo Tribunal Federal, especially the Justice Alexandre de Moraes. And we really have the ideal expert here to talk about this with us to us today. Professor David Niemer is associate professor in the Department of Media Studies at the University of Virginia, and also an affiliated faculty member in the Department of Anthropology and the Latin American Studies program. He's also a faculty associate at Harvard University's Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. His research covers wide variety of things, but science and technology studies, anthropology of technology, human-computer interaction. He's an ethnographer who's carried out field work in Vitória, Brazil, Havana, Guadalajara, and also Eastern Kentucky. And he's the author of, his first book was Technology of the Oppressed, published by MIT Press in 2022, winner of the Marcel Rocha Award, and also Favela Digital, second book, The Other Side of Technology, which first book is Favela Digital, The Other Side of Technology, published by Editora GCA in 2013. He holds an MA in Anthropology from the University of Virginia, an MS in Computer Science from Saarland University, and a PhD in Computing, Culture, and Society from Indiana University, which is how we know each other, because I was at IU before I came here to UCLA. And also, in fact, he just spoke about exactly this topic earlier this week to the Tribunal Superior Electoral, the Supreme Electoral Court. He was in Brasilia to do that. And so, we have someone here with us today who is recognized as such an expert on questions of technology, fake news, social media, that one of the Brazilian Supreme Courts has invited him to speak on this topic. So we're really excited to have you here with us today, and take it away.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So the plan here is to give you some sort of overview about what's going on between Elon Musk in Brazil, but more specifically with the battle between Elon Musk and the Supreme Court. So this all goes back to the presidential elections in 2022, when Lula won the election and went back to his third term. Brazil, during the election period, Brazil gets in some sort of state of exception, in the sense that the Electoral Supreme Court does have special powers to make sure that the electoral process moves forward without any sort of intervention or any sort of attempt to delegitimize the process, for example. And as you would know, during the election time is when we see a surge of misinformation, and this is where the Supreme Electoral Court, which I would just call TSE, which is the acronym for that. So the TSE acts really strongly and hands-on to make sure that misinformation is not spread. It doesn't compromise this democratic process. So during the 2022 electoral period, then the camp that sides with Bolsonaro, which are seen as the far right and conservatives, they obviously try to manipulate all kinds of media and promote disinformation campaigns to not only create a different perception of Lula, but also to delegitimize the electoral process. So they try to send videos about how the voting machines were all malfunctioning, how China and Venezuela, they both communist countries had special interest in having Lula winning. So they created all kinds of softwares that were embedded in the voting machines. So then it would let Lula to win. So all this sort of misinformation and the misinformation that were put into place were not something done organically, like by the citizens, but no, it was orchestrated by people that were in the government, the people that were in the military, and people that had special influence on the internet. And because of that, then the Electoral Supreme Court decided to investigate, and the person who was responsible, the person chairing the Electoral Court was Alexandre de Moraes. And in Brazil, the electoral process is overseen by the judicial branch. So the Supreme Court has a branch called the Supreme Electoral Court that takes care of the election. So it's very centralized. And again, like I said, the courts do get a lot of hands-on to make sure that the process is smooth. So Alexandre de Moraes, who belongs at the Supreme Court, he was chairing the electoral Supreme Court at that time. And he already knew about the sort of expectations in terms of all these bad actors playing together to make sure that they would delegitimize the process. They would do anything possible to make sure that Bolsonaro would win. So he was already expecting that, and he was very proactive and used all the power in his hands that is given to the Electoral Supreme Court to investigate and to take down any sort of content that would break the law. Brazil has an internet law, which the United States doesn't. The European Union has one. And this law was passed in 2014. And at the time, it was considered one of the most progressive and one of the most inclusive and holistic laws in terms of regulating the internet. So we do have a regulated internet that, guess what? Every company that wants to operate in Brazil, they have to follow these laws. That's a universal law that every company has to follow. We have what we call the Article 19. Article 19 works sort of like Section 230 in the United States, that whoever publishes a content on social media, that person is the immediate responsible for that content. So if you want to sue someone, you have to sue the person, not the platform. That's what Section 230 basically says. But in Brazil, Article 19 said, well, at first, the person who published the content is the one responsible for that content. So if you want to sue, you can sue that person. And if that content is found to break any sort of law, the courts can demand the platforms to take down those contents, those posts, those messages. If the platforms deny to do so, they are equally responsible criminally or civilly of that content, just like the person who published it. As we know, unfortunately, social media platforms are filled with bots and fake accounts that take advantage of the internet, the possibility of being anonymous on the internet. And the Supreme Court went after all these accounts, all these orchestrations of misinformation during the election period. And then the courts demanded the platforms to take down all kinds of contents that were promoting, they were breaking the laws and trying to delegitimize the process. So as you can imagine, platforms that belong to Meta, like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, they all follow suit. And Twitter was also following. And the turn happens when Elon Musk decides to buy out Twitter right in 2022, which sort of coincides um, with the elections in Brazil. So at first, he was not very hands-on in changing how things were working around the world with Twitter. But then he decided to downsize the platform just because it's a deficit platform, right? It never really makes profit, and he wanted to make sure that Twitter was profitable, so they closed down a bunch of offices that were geared towards content moderation, which, as you probably saw on the news, the number of posts that were promoting anti-Semitism, all kinds of hate speech surged on the platform, and along with that, misinformation. At first, he wasn't too involved with a case in Brazil until he decided to publish the Twitter files through Michael Schellenberger. I think that's his last name. And then Brazil became at the forefront because of how the far right sort of tried to instrumentalize how the Supreme Court were intervening and breaking democracy in order to make sure that Lula was elected. The Justice Alexandre de Moraes did not back down and kept doubling down actually on takedown notices and going after everybody that act together to make sure that Lula wouldn't get elected. This, we call it the fake news inquiry. This fake news inquiry is still going on to this day. And as Susanna mentioned about the plot to kill Lula, was not only to kill Lula, but also to kill Alexandre de Moraes and the Vice President Geraldo Alckmin. This is also being investigated by this inquiry. So this inquiry got bigger and bigger and bigger because basically everything is connected to all the wrongdoings that we saw happening since the elections in 2022. So as Elon Musk loves to claim himself to be a free speech absolutist, which is total BS because he only becomes a free speech absolutist when it's convenient for him. For example, in India, where he was asked to take down content by the government, he did. But in Brazil, he's been fighting this war with the Supreme Court, which is not, and I know this is a different understanding of what it means to be in the government. In Brazil, the government is actually the executive branch. The judicial branch does not belong to the government. Those are separated. In the United States, we used to say that the government is like the legislative, the justice, and then the executive. It's important to mention that everything went through a sort of trial, like a due process following the law. So it wasn't the executive, the government demanding content to be taken down, because this is usually seen in autocracies and dictatorships. And this is important to say because this is how the far right is trying to label what is happening with the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court doesn't have anything to do with the government, so it's two different things. So moving on, so Alexandre de Moraes is asking content to be taken down, and then Musk says, no, I'm a free speech absolutist. And then if you don't follow court orders, you are breaking other rules. So then Alexandre de Moraes used the power at his reach and whatever the laws allowed him to do to then start going after the company. So in Brazil, there's a law that demands every company to have a representative, a legal representative, and a commercial representative in the country. It's not truly enforced unless you start getting in trouble with the laws, because if you're getting in trouble, you need somebody to respond for you. And then Twitter had a lawyer there that was following Musk's order, and the lawyer was not cooperating. And then Justice Alexandre de Moraes said, well, if you do not comply with the court orders, then you could get arrested because you're just not following the laws. And then Elon Musk tried to make this by saying this was a huge deal because the government was going after people from his company. So then he dissolved the office in Brazil, emptied out the bank accounts that Twitter had in the country. So even have been fined by the Supreme Court, then you could say that he doesn't do business in Brazil. So there's nothing that Alexandre de Moraes could do to Twitter. But guess what? Elon Musk, as you know, he has other companies in the world and in Brazil, especially Starlink. Starlink has a very good reach in the country, especially in the Amazon region where infrastructure is problematic, especially when it comes to accessing the internet. And it's a very profitable company. So then not only Justice Alexandre de Moraes demanded Twitter to be blocked in the country, and he also froze the accounts, the bank accounts that belong to Starlink as well. So basically, Alexandre de Moraes was going after everywhere that Musk had a finger on in the countries. And to block a service in Brazil or any country in the world, it doesn't happen like like when you flip the switch. It requires a due process where you have to ask the telecommunication agency, to ask the internet providers to then block the IP address of this service. So then the court order was sent to the telecommunications agency that demanded the ISPs to block Twitter. It was blocked. Obviously, as you can see, as you can guess, he was not happy about this blocking. So then he tried to fool the DNS addresses and try to change access to X in Brazil by changing the DNS. Instead of going to the Twitter server, the X server, he changed and he redirected the IP to go through Cloudflare. So then Cloudflare could provide the access to Twitter as a platform only in Brazil. And, it was something that everybody caught that immediately. Supreme Justice Alexandre de Moraes saw that and increased the fine against Elon Musk. And in the end, he ended up with a bigger fine with X blocked in Brazil and also the bank accounts of Starlink's frozen in the country until he paid the fines and followed the laws in the country. A lot of people bet that Elon Musk was not going to back down, but then he eventually did. He eventually lost this battle. I don't know if it's he lost the war because the war is still going on, but he totally lost this battle. He saw that against the Supreme Court in Brazil, he will lose, at least as far as this episode goes. It shows that he was going to lose. So then he eventually paid all the fines. He removed all the tweets and accounts that the Supreme Court had demanded to be taken down, and then assigned a representative for X in the country. So in case of future trouble, then the Supreme Court has someone to go after to start a conversation so the due process can start. So this is where we stand right now. So X is back in Brazil, but because of Elon Musk being such a polarizing figure and given the far right turn that he has given to Twitter, then folks that side with progressives, the left, and so on, decided to quit Twitter and join Blue Sky. So there's like a divide in the country of those that tend to be more progressive, more on the left, are on Blue Skies, and those are on the far right are on Twitter. And now with Trump being elected and Musk being involved with the government, we don't know at which capacity. He's already somehow acting as a Secretary of State in the sense that Trump had a meeting with Zelensky in Ukraine, and then he was part of that conversation. So it's quite dangerous to know that somebody with that sort of mentality and stability is actually advising the United States. He has his own interest and he will fight for his own interest. He does not have any sense of collectiveness. And right now, it seems that he lost this battle in Brazil, but it would be interesting to see how things change as we move forward, because we're going to have presidential elections in 2 years. And the same way that he basically had acts working to promote Trump, as studies have shown, I'm sure that he's going to do the same thing in Brazil to promote whoever is going to be the candidate of the far right. Bolsonaro, for now, cannot run because he's ineligible for breaking the laws as well. So we don't know how that's going to play out and who's going to be taking over as the representative of the far right. But some people have a hard time understanding why Brazil, of all the countries. Well, Brazil is a big country when it comes, especially when it comes to social media use. Brazil is number 2 when it comes to spending more time online. And on Twitter, it was right there with the United States in terms of data production. So when you're producing a lot of data, that's what the platforms really care. So it's a big market. And he also felt the backing by far-right politicians in Brazil. And they have a very convenient relationship in the sense that he does not want his platform to be regulated by any sort of laws. And Brazil, as just shown, does have some laws that regulate the internet, but we are actually in the process of finding ways to update these laws and come out with new laws. And this is why I was in Brasilia to discuss ways that we can update these laws to be more updated in terms of understanding things like artificial intelligence, algorithms, and so on. In 2014, we didn't really have these new technologies, so an update is required right now. So the far-right politicians also do not want a regulated platform because they do monetize and they do become more popular in platforms that are not regulated, because content that promotes the sort of extreme speech or the negative commotion like fear, anger, and anxiety, it's the sort of content that the algorithms prioritize in that platform. So it's the sort of content that the far right always promotes, right? So immigrants eating dogs, or like how we have in Brazil, there was the so-called gay kit in schools that were forcing kids to become gays. So all this moral panic, all these anxieties and fears, unfortunately, algorithms will prioritize that kind of content because it's the content that people engage the most. So they have gamed these platforms. They learn how to win, and they don't want that formula to change. And the only way to change that is through a regulation. So by supporting far-right politicians in Brazil, Musk can rest assured that his platform will not be regulated. And by not having this regulation, then these far-right politicians can pretty much do whatever they want in his platform without having any sort of content moderation. And just to close here, getting to a conclusion, and although we do talk a lot about internet regulations, most of the things that these people did during the election period, it wasn't really necessary an internet law to sort of frame the things that they did as unlawful. So in Brazil, hate speech is not considered free speech, has been criminalized. Homophobic speech has been criminalized. So anything that brings that sort of content is automatically understood as a crime, and the courts could demand these things to be taken down. So the challenge now is to see how we can make sure that the courts have direct access to platforms like Facebook, Twitter, to act faster, and what is the best way to optimize this relationship and not having bad actors like Elon Musk thinking that they can do whatever they want and everywhere, without facing the consequences. I think this is an overall summary. If Brian and Suzanne, if you feel like I've missed anything, please let me know and I'll go back to that. But should we go into questions or comments?
Muted. Let's go into questions. This is all has the feeling of being kind of inchoate, and you have an election coming up pretty soon. One thing that Elon Musk has threatened in the US is to use his mega PAC to control the elections of in the primaries and to fund other kinds of preferred candidates. Does Brazil have the same capacity with these kinds of external capital coming in on these PACs?
Yeah, so basically what he did in the US elections would not be considered legal in Brazil. You wouldn't be allowed.
Mm-hmm.
In Brazil, the ways that campaigns are financed is actually through taxpayers' money. There's this big, let's say, savings account that collects taxpayers' money and then divide between the parties, and that's how they support their campaigns. There are ways to make personal donations as well, but it's also very limited. So what he did in the United States wouldn't be possible in Brazil, at least in terms of giving that sort of money or even um, seducing people to fill out forms so they could win $1 million. That would be very illegal in Brazil and not allowed.
Should have been illegal here.
Yeah, I mean, the lines between legal and illegal are start to get kind of complicated. Is the next question I would have, and then we can go into the chat and other kinds of questions. Is what is the role of bots in the Brazilian case? Here, of course, there's what, 4 bots for every person who's on a social media account. How is the bot dynamic going on in Brazil in
So
terms of these kinds of movements?
yeah, it's a very similar behavior because the approach is basically the same. It's just a matter of updating, let's say, the language that they will engage on the platform. One of the promises that Elon Musk had when buying Twitter was that he was going to get rid of bots and fake accounts, which he didn't, right? As we can see. So it's instrumental to make sure that these disinformation campaigns get reach farther and wider. And it's a way to perpetuate certain kinds of speeches and certain kinds of disinformation. So it's very instrumental in making sure that sort of whatever disinformation campaign is going on to make sure it's distributed far and wide so people are exposed to that sort of disinformation. So it was still very much used over here.
Is there any chance of regulating it? I think here with our new FCC person who's totally anti-regulation of the internet, seeing that any regulation is censorship. In Brazil, is there any chance of getting hold of these sort of bot dynamics
We got
and
really
with AI and added in?
Yeah, so we got really close of updating that regulation with the bill called 2630, which tried to address and tackle some of these issues of fake accounts, bots, algorithmic regulation. It was very broad in that sense. And one of the ways that that bill got momentum was because in the beginning of 2023, that were school shootings happening in Brazil that were being planned out on Discord, which is like a social media platform. So that created that sort of panic and scare that, parents and civil society demanded something to be done. And then some Congress people felt the need to move forward with the bill 2630. Unfortunately, the momentum died down. And then Congress that is mostly with a far-right majority, made sure to kill that bill. And right now, we don't have anything specifically about it. So now there are these other initiatives, like through the Supreme Court, through the we have the sort of commercial slash ads laws that we have in Brazil. So we're trying to use what we have in place to make sure that platforms comply with these laws that are already in place. But for now, in terms of passing a law, it's very difficult given the current state of our Congress, which is very conservative, and they see any sort of efforts to regulate social media as censorship. The same ways, same
Same as
conversation
we
that
have
we
here.
have. Yeah. Yeah.
To kind of build on that question, then, you know, I've been struck by the fact that Brazilian right has been so supportive of of the richest man in the world who is not Brazilian trying to interfere in Brazilian institutions. Because I think about the period I studied, military dictatorship, and when the Carter administration came to power in the U.S. and started chastising Brazil for its human rights record, the left in the Brazilian Congress was like, well, we agree with you, but wait a minute, you have no business interfering in Brazil's internal affairs, right? So there's this sort of like the kind of the guiding principle was, Brazil is foreigners should not meddle in Brazil. Now you have something that's kind of jarring to me, which is you have Brazilian politicians defending sort of a form of like U.S. corporate imperialism, I guess, if not political imperialism, although the two are so blurred now. What does this say about the way that polarization has grown in Brazilian politics? You saw things recently like the bombing outside the STF.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to, on the one hand, there's like the regulation of fake news and everything, but also like the polarization is so extreme now. So I guess my real question is like, is there any way to put the genie back in the bottle? Passing a new law, and especially sort of like the proliferation of social media platforms and the fact that if they want to, apparently they'll just ignore the law. Is there really any way to reverse this polarization or to keep it from getting worse?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that's the $1 million question that we're trying to answer, right? I think these big tech social media platforms, they have become so big that the only way to, I wouldn't say fight, but the only way to tame them a bit is through regulation, because the state is the only thing that is big enough that can control or at least regulate these social medias. Because some people say, oh, let the users decide what's best for them. No, we're way past that time that users were seen as customers that had rights in terms of demanding the companies to change according to how they would want this company to better serve them. No, the dynamics with social media platforms are different. The way that we produce data, which is basically their digital commodity. Anyways, so the only way that I see moving forward here is through regulation. And this is why Elon Musk has been so dedicated to get so political, because regulations it will go completely against his plans and ways to expand not only Twitter but also his AI platform and so on. And of course, other big techs like Google and Amazon, they won't say anything. They will let Elon Musk get the bad reputation, but they will also capitalize on these refutals of regulations and so on. Yes, in Brazil, things are very polarized, and basically anything is either on the left or on the far right, in the sense that Alexandre de Moraes is now seen as this public enemy of the far right, and it's a large group of people that see themselves and sell themselves as being patriotics and patriots, but at the same time, they rather stick to Elon Musk instead with their own state institutions. They truly see that Lula and Alexandre de Moraes are public enemies, and they should be taken down. And no matter what should be done and who will do this, it has to be done. And they see through Elon Musk a way to take them down, and whatever that means. So when Trump won, and having Elon Musk being associated with Trump so closely, then it sort of brought this new energy within the far right in Brazil. Like they are all public, they are posting all kinds of misinformation saying that now Elon Musk will tell Trump to arrest Lula and arrest Alexandre de Moraes. But, Trump can't do this. Trump couldn't care less about Brazil either, right? So it's not something that is on it's on his agenda, but it's certainly the symbolism of having Trump and so close to Elon Musk is causing all this furor and this re-energizing of the far right in the country, because they do see them as a way to beat the communists. There are Lula and Alexandre de Moraes.
All right, let's go ahead
I'm
and
gonna make just one more comment, and then we should go to the questions that are coming in online. The comment I was gonna make is that Eduardo Bolsonaro was at the celebration party with in Mar-a-Lago with Elon Musk and everybody else, and Steve Bannon. And Steve Bannon, I understand, has been making a lot of trips to Brazil as part of a more general advisory dynamic on the Bolsonaristas, not necessarily Jair, but as a right-wing movement. Do you want to comment on that, or because I think we can't kind of see, there certainly is like sovereignty separations, but there's sort of ideological and practical integration that's going on here.
Yeah, so Steve Bannon has this his own journey, or let's say his own goals of making the world more conservative, according to his own words. In 2018, when Bolsonaro first ran for president and won, he was invited to be part of the official campaign, but he said no because he was too busy working with Salvini in Italy. They ended up winning in Italy, won some seats in Sweden, but then overall lost, with Le Pen in France. But now he's back in business in terms of finding other markets to turn those markets conservatives. And one way to do this, and that's where Eduardo Bolsonaro comes into the scene, is that they're trying to promote the CPAC, meetings, the CPAC conferences all over the world, especially in Brazil. And Eduardo Bolsonaro is the official ambassador of CPAC in the country. So I'm not surprised that they are, collaborating and trying to find ways to establish, a sustainable movement to make Brazil more conservative.
Okay, let's go ahead and go to the first question from the virtual audience. The first question we have is from Vinicius Asturari. It says, do you think the Brazilian case could in some way send a message to other countries about how to deal with social media platforms, especially Musk and X? Because after some weeks, Musk gave in to, eventually Musk did give in to Alexandre de Moraes' demands about the payment of the fine and the appointment of a legal representative. And then the second question, building on that, says it looks like X is now sort of the new far-right platform worldwide. Is this going to facilitate the growth of the far-right worldwide, or is X going to become this sort of like fringe thing like Truth Social, right, where it just sort of becomes an echo chamber that nobody else pays attention to?
Yeah, no, these are great questions. So yes, and this is something, as we know, Elon Musk is someone who has a huge ego, and losing this battle to Alexandre de Moraes, he felt a defeat because he was sending this message across the world that the richest man in the world is not unbeatable. In fact, he has to comply with local laws. And after the defeat in Brazil, the European Union courts that deal with social media platform regulations and AI regulations sort of repeated the things that Alexandre de Moraes was saying, that you have to comply with local laws. If you don't comply, then you're not going to get away. You're not anyone more special than any other platforms. So yes, it did send a message across the world that Elon Musk is not unbeatable. And in terms of what X has become. And this is something that I tell my students that, the process of turning Twitter into X, it's like turning X, like Twitter, into this very niched platforms like Gab, Truth Social, Parler, that once tried to become like Twitter, but now we see Twitter becoming just like these platforms that are niched towards the far right. So yeah, so it has become this way, and not just through an organic movement in the sense that people that didn't align themselves with Elon Musk decided to leave, but also because the algorithm has been behaving in ways that it promotes far-right content more than it promotes other contents. There are studies out there that show that when people tweeted about Trump, it was prioritized by the algorithm when compared to things that were tweeted about Kamala Harris. So he has made that sort of effort, which is completely hypocritical because he kept saying that social media platforms should be neutral, even though neutrality on social media platforms are not possible. But he kept trying to repeat that sort of narrative. And now we see himself working actively to make sure that his platform will benefit one candidate according to his own alignments over the other. So yes, Twitter is doomed to become exactly what the copycats have become. So it's going to be a niched in terms of serving the far right.
Brian has had to step out for a minute. I'm going to read you from Sara Delegalo, who asked, how do you see the freedom of speech in the USA and the freedom of speech in Brazil? It seems that in Brazil, this freedom needed to be more regulated to prevent people from being manipulated specifically in social media. So
Yeah,
your thoughts?
yeah, we do have very different regulations when it comes to free speech. So in Brazil, it seems that free speech is more regulated in the sense that, like I said, hate speech is not considered free speech. Like homophobic speech is not considered free speech. And it's also a myth to say that the First Amendment in the United States promotes a absolutist free speech. It doesn't. Like
It
obscene
doesn't.
speech,
Yeah.
is not allowed. You can't, you can't show porn and broad light TV, open TVs in the United States. And porn is understood as speech, but it's regulated. So this idea of unregulated free speech is a myth. It's an imaginarium. And as an anthropologist, I can say that there wasn't any sort of civilization or community that didn't have speech regulated. There's always a way to regulate, either through social norms or written laws. Anyways, so this idea it doesn't match. It's very convenient to fulfill and to fulfill some sort of capitalist goal or making the platform more profitable, but it doesn't stick. And in Brazil, the just going to the second part of the question, uh, free speech in Brazil was regulated not because of social media. It was already in place, and it was updated due to other things. But now, rightfully so, should be used not just in the offline world, but also in the online world. We need to get over the fact that there's a separation between the real and the virtual. That's no longer a productive division, but we have an online world and offline world, but both a part of our own experience, of our own place in the world. So what you do online should also comply with offline laws. It's part of one experience. So it doesn't make sense to not have this understanding that anything flies, anything should be allowed on the internet, because it just doesn't work that way.
We have another question from Leila Marisa, who points out that WhatsApp also plays a big role in Brazilian elections, unlike in the United States. And it's one of the tools used a lot by when the far right came to power in 2018. Leila also says that she read your book, Technology the Oppressed, mentioning how Facebook is the internet for many poor people. And I'm guessing that today, I mean, the same could be said of WhatsApp as well, right? And of course, WhatsApp is owned by Facebook.
Yeah.
And talk a little bit too about where WhatsApp fits into this as well, and where Meta overall fits into this.
Yes. So in 2018, WhatsApp was actually on the hotspot for the spread of misinformation. And it was actually when I started this work on misinformation online. And at least Meta, I'm not saying that Meta is a saint or they are easy to work with. They're not. But they were willing to listen and they were willing to make changes and solutions that were geared towards mitigating some of this issues with misinformation. One of them being that before you could forward any message to as many people, as many groups you wanted. Now it's limited. You can only forward to two or three people, and that slows down the spread of this information and even creates hurdles for people to even be motivated to spread this information. So any hurdle, any extra step that you add into this spread of information or disinformation, it truly slows down how they are spread. So there was that. They also took down any sort of automated behavior. So you're not allowed to have bots running on WhatsApp, for example. And that's very easy to catch. So they were taking down any sort of automated or robotic behavior on their platform. They also created channels that you could report content, and then because it's an encrypted platform, and once you decrypt the message and report the message, then there are ways that they can follow the IDs of that message and then take it down because it can be, criminal content or misinformation content. So they were doing something about that. And again, thank you for reading my book. And as this idea of having Facebook and now WhatsApp as the internet of the people, it's extremely problematic, especially because it comes through an initiative called the Free Basics, right? Or or what Meta had as internet.org, that they were claiming that they were giving people free internet, but that was not true. What they were giving was access to their platforms for free. So it was a way for them to reach markets that they couldn't have otherwise because people couldn't pay for their data plans, but they could sponsor people to use their platform. So these people would produce data that they harvest and exploit in many different ways. And this is problematic because if you're on WhatsApp and you receive a disinformation, you do have access to that misinformation, but there's no way for you to check online. So you can go browsing and look for an answer or look, as a fact checking of that disinformation, or even sometimes people become readers of headlines instead of the whole article. Then on WhatsApp, you can read the headline and you wouldn't be able to click on the link because you do not have access to free browsing. You only have access to the platforms owned by Meta. So it was one of the ways that misinformation became so prevalent in Brazil, especially on these platforms, because people were consuming misinformation and not given the ability to check that disinformation in other platforms like browsing or other social media platforms, because they didn't have access to those platforms, only to Meta. So now it's considered illegal, but then they do find ways to say, oh, it's not just Meta. You have, access to X. You have access to TikTok, but you still have access to WhatsApp and Facebook. So it still keeps the same sort of rationale, the same mentality, which is completely disastrous for any sort of attempt to debunk some of these disinformation campaigns.
We have another question, kind of a broader question from David Walsh. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and look at Brazil kind of in transnational perspective or in global perspective. Um, how is support for the far right in Brazil similar to or different from what we see in other countries, like specifically the United States, but also places like Hungary and other places in Europe as well?
The support for the far right in Brazil. Well, now I mean, we just came out from local elections in Brazil, where people elected mayors all over the country, and we did see a portion of the population that usually sided with the left, siding with those candidates, and those were people facing poverty, for example. And now, we see far right messages and far right propaganda reaching these people because one, they have access to technology that now they have, in their pocket, but also because they feel like other governments have failed them and they're still living this precarious life. And then now the far right is selling them this dream of being, self-entrepreneur or following this coach way of life or um, selling this dream of meritocracy that you only need one chance to become successful, so you can do this. So it becomes, this very, again, seducing narratives that unfortunately these people are buying. And there's also another major player that is making a huge difference in Brazil, which is the evangelical churches. They are becoming instrumental to promoting far-right ideas in Brazil because they side with them in many items like abortion. They're against LGBTQ rights. All these things that the far right are calling to be woke. Right now, they're calling this wokenism, which is now their new scarecrow that they're using to refute any sort of policy or any sort of actions from the left. So unfortunately, the church has become the conservative church is becoming a big ally in supporting the far right in Brazil.
I would just add to that too that something that distinguishes evangelicals in Brazil from a lot of other places, that evangelical movement in Brazil is so heavily tilted towards prosperity theology. And what is prosperity theology if not basically the Christianization of capitalism, right? What God wants for you more than anything else is for you to be rich, right? And if you're not rich, it's because you didn't pray hard enough or work hard enough. And so I think for many evangelical pastors, um, there's also this like really rabid defense of sort of like laissez-faire capitalism as well.
Yep.
Susanna, was there anything else you wanted to bring up? Because right at the moment we don't have any questions from the audience, unless anyone else wants to submit something else.
I was just gonna say it's a long way from liberation theology to, the prosperity gospel in terms of social justice and liberation. And the whole role of liberation theology in the transformation from dictatorship to democracy, and now we see a sort of other kind of trend. I just have a sort of loose question. What do you see? What's your feeling about the next election in Brazil?
Well, it's my feeling. I'm a little concerned. I'm a little concerned, and there's a lot that could happen. Um, One, it seems like Lula is gonna run for re-election, because we don't see anyone in the left bringing some sort of being promoted right now. So it seems like Lula is gonna run for re-election. The far right they're already using the same narratives that the far right did here in the United States with the calling Biden that he was too old to run anything. So that whole ageism is already playing out, that Lula will be too old. And there is another question of who's going to be the representative of the far right, who's going to be Bolsonaro, who's going to be the chosen one by Bolsonaro. They still believe that for some reason, and that Trump could possibly help them to get the sentence, or that made Bolsonaro an elective annulled. They truly believe that there will be something will happen, that Bolsonaro will actually be allowed to run for president in 2026. I don't think that will be possible. I don't think that's going to happen, especially given everything that they are finding out after this murder attempt. Now there's, breaking in every.
Yeah, assassination attempt.
Yeah, so I don't think he's going to be running. So the big question is, who's going to be the next one? People have some beliefs that Tarcísio, who's the current governor of São Paulo, will be the representative. But Bolsonaro has said, forget about thinking of any names. I am the current, the only feasible candidate, even though he's not allowed to run. So we should see there's going to be a lot of fight against the electoral process again. They will try to claim it unlawful, whatever rule that Bolsonaro couldn't run again. So there's going to be a lot into the game here. And again, they feel very re-energized because Trump won. So we're going to see a lot of movements going on to see, to define who's going to be the next one. So there's not going to be a dull day we haven't had any dull since then. And I don't think it's going to slow down at all. It's actually going to be more intense.
We had another question come from a member of the audience. I actually really like the question. So Marshall Rea asked us, who's actually an alumnus of our bachelor's program in Latin American Studies here at UCLA, and has lived in Brazil, is currently working in South America as a supply chain consultant. It says the tone of today, I'm a little bit troubled by the tone of today's discussion. I'm characterizing Elon Musk and his involvement in both US politics and Brazilian business as a negative. He argues that Musk's recent increased public persona has been a breath of fresh air in the US. His coming role in the new Department of Government Efficiency represents some much needed reining in of government overreach and bloatedness. So we've heard a lot about our perception of the negatives here, but to provide some balance to today's dialogue, he says, I'm wondering if you could highlight some of the benefits that Elon Musk has brought to Brazil with the advent of X and Starlink.
So he didn't invent Twitter or X, right? He's actually destroying the platform. Brazilians love Twitter. Brazilians were, the second largest population on the platform. He just forgot about content moderation, and the platform became so toxic that people didn't feel like being there. Like I said before, people were not moving away from Twitter because it was bought out by Elon Musk. It was because what he did to the platform. If he had kept Twitter the way it was, I think people wouldn't have changed their perception about the platform. So it was his deliberate action. And in terms of Starlink, sure, like he's bringing internet to places where people don't have access to the internet infrastructure. So like in the middle of the Amazon and remote cities, there's value to that, but it's also very problematic. For example, the whole the thing that he did to Ukraine, he basically said that he would not provide internet access through Starlink to any sort of drone activity in Crimea because he did not want to get into that politics. He did not want to get in trouble with Russia. So why didn't you say this before? And the same thing in Brazil is that these cities are becoming very dependable on Starlink infrastructure. And it's, we're talking about whole cities here. So 90% of border cities in the Amazon are using Starlink as their main infrastructure to access internet. And they're using, for many reasons, from sending hospital EMRs to, dealing with their bureaucracies online. So it's not just social media, right? So it's the whole functioning of cities in these platforms. And because Musk is so unreliable, and has such a big ego that you cannot have, cities running on a platform that you don't know if the platform will run the same way the next day or the next week, or if he's going to get into a fight with the Supreme Court, then he's going to decide to just shut down the internet. That sort of stability you need when you are providing vital infrastructure to, these cities. So again, Starlink is good as a provider of internet. Sure. Is it good to rely on a private company that has Musk as an owner? I don't think so. He's unpredictable, he's unreliable. So I don't think it is good. So it's a wake-up call for the government to provide that sort of infrastructure to make sure that the people don't have to rely on unstable and egoistic people. So yeah, I'm sorry, I don't see anything good coming out of Elon Musk. If he's a visionary, sure. But if we look into the histories of Tesla, the histories of SpaceX, we will know that he hasn't invented anything. He was just a rich person that had an idea and it was good to put the right people to do whatever he wanted to accomplish, but he never really accomplished anything. So this garage myth that he went inside of a garage and came out with a Tesla is a myth. It wasn't him. So as a person, I'm sorry, I don't think I can see anything nice about him.
Not even to mention the fact that for someone who takes such a dim view on undocumented immigration to the United States, he came from South Africa on what, a student visa, and overstayed the visa, and worked illegally in the United States. So,
And
popcorn.
And this is the sort of thought that is in his head. So one of the main reasons why he bought out Twitter it was because he thought Twitter was a incubator of the so-called woke virus. And it was because of that woke virus that made his daughter to transition. He's got a transgender daughter that doesn't speak to him, obviously, because of the ways that he talks about transgender rights. And now he's got his own goal of defeating wokeism and the woke virus that is on Twitter. I mean, to think that somebody in their right mind truly believes that, I just can't seem to know how to relate to someone that has that sort of thought, let alone trust in him to run an internet infrastructure that pretty much is providing the infrastructure to whole cities. So yeah,
For that matter.
exactly.
Have we got any more questions? I don't see any.
From the audience, we've reached an hour.
How about you, Brian? Have you got some questions?
I think I've gotten through most of my questions. I guess we could sort of maybe end by asking, where do we go from here? Not just in the sense, you've already talked about a little bit about where Brazil goes in terms of trying to develop more ironclad regulation, right, for online speech. But I guess I'm thinking that there's sort of like broader things happening here, which is like this kind of involvement for a foreign corporation in Brazilian politics, right? This kind of involvement for corporate people in U.S. politics, which has always been the case, right? The country's always been run by the U.S. has always been run by corporate plutocrats, but not usually this, brazenly. Is this sort of a new era of corporate government lending in Brazil, or is this just a repetition of past patterns? And what's going to happen next?
I think not in Brazil, because one thing that still occupies the institutional mentality in the country is that, these companies come from abroad, so they belong to other countries, and they have those countries in their best interest. So this is why I believe that we'll have some sort of regulation moving forward, either through the judiciary branch or through the legislative branch. And I think another player that will come into this messy situation and will shuffle things around is China.
Yeah.
We have China coming in with, TikTok is not associated with the government, but it is a company associated with China as a country. And he blames Brazil for promoting censorship when Twitter was banned, but he doesn't have anything to say when TikTok was banned. It's in the process of getting banned in the United States if they don't find a buyer in the country. So he doesn't say anything about this. But and the reason why I'm bringing China is because we see China booming as a economic power. BYD, which is a electric car manufacturer, is already taking over. I think it has passed Tesla as the number one um, electric cars manufacturer in the world. It's all over Brazil. It's in Europe. It's not allowed in the United States. So we're seeing Chinese companies coming in as an alternative to these companies coming from the United States. So it'll be interesting to see how these companies, especially the big tech companies, will behave in terms of trying to keep their hegemony in these countries like Latin America. Would they fight the government and then open the space for these Chinese companies to enter, or would they collaborate with local authorities so they can keep their hegemony in these countries and then keep away the Chinese competition? So I think that's where we will see a lot of these new things playing out, is how like China and the United States, through their companies, will be fighting for these markets. I think we'll see, because now these countries will have uh, um, other players to negotiate. It's not just American tech companies. Now we have other tech companies coming in. So I think that will also uh, bring some interesting new episodes to this very Brazilian soap opera.
The thing I'm just gonna say by then this is the last comment, which is really given the role of China. Whoop, I have a puppy here who's trying to jump on my lap. Um, if you think about the shift in trade and infrastructure and investment, in many ways, you can make the argument that China is the new hegemon in South America, and in Brazil, it's just invested. So here's my dog sitting here and saying hello. Sorry about this. I know it's unprofessional, but there you go. But I think this whole question of this new hegemony and the end of American hegemony sort of hits we're sort of at a larger cusp, in the sense that if you think of 1988 as a big transformation of political culture in South America, toward democracy and the sort of end of the authoritarian period, at least for a time. We're sort of in another moment, and the hegemony and the hegemon has shifted as well.
Yeah. And if you keep fighting these governments, if you keep fighting those local institutions, you're not gonna help keeping your hegemony in this country. So we'll see how they will behave.
Yeah. Well, David, thank you so much for your time. That we're glad that you could make time for us on your busy schedule, and you're in Brazil now. We should check in with you because, as we know, there's plenty going on in the judicial stories. And Moraes was also the subject of an assassination attempt recently, was he not? With that car bomb, like last week. It's hard to keep track of
Yeah.
everything all the time these days.
He was on the list of people that the terrorists wanted to kill, but there was nothing. I mean, the bomb was set off in this public square by the Supreme Court. So it was not like directly at him, but he was on the list that was later found. But yeah, I mean,
Oh,
it's as scary as, as an assassination attempt. And I'm not trying to downplay that, but there wasn't like anything directly to him because the bomb was set off. I don't know
and
how
that,
that happened. I don't know if it was
yeah.
accidental, suicidal. Yeah. But
Ryan, you
yeah.
want to add anything?
No, I think that's probably a good ending point for us. Unless you have any, either of you have any closing comments.
Not me.
Oh, just thank you all for the time and the opportunity to talk here. And thank you so much for the questions. They were really good.
And thank you so much to everyone for joining us.
Yeah.
Being with us today. The next event for the Center of Brazilian Studies is actually coming up this coming Monday, November 25th at 2:30 p.m. It's an event that we are co-organizing with the Department of Geography, and it's going to be a talk by Sandro Dutra e Silva of Universidade Evangélica de Goiás and Universidade Estadual de Goiás, The Invention of the Cerrado, Geography, History, and Ecology in the Territorial Delineation of the Brazilian Tropical Savanna. This talk is going to be at 2:30 p.m. on Monday, November 25th. If you're here on campus, it's going to be in Bunch Hall, room 1261. If you go to our Facebook page, you can also see the link to the virtual portion. You can watch online as well via Zoom. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and have a great rest of your day and rest of your week.
Thank you.
My dog will say goodbye too.